Yeah, that's great, Ross. Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Apologies for the slightly late start. Joined today by Sir Richard Lees, who leads on health and care for Greater Manchester, and by Baroness Beverly Hughes, leads on policing, crime and fire. We've just had a meeting of the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee. So that's myself, our council leaders and public health experts and others. And obviously, there is a significant development today, which we want to talk to you about. First, though, I think it is important to get the context set very clearly. So I'm going to hand over, as I normally do, to Sir Richard to take you through the latest slides and the data for Greater Manchester. So, Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. You'll have to. Yep. Sorry, I lost my screen for a second, but I'm back now. Good afternoon, everybody. Start as always with the prevalence rates of cases per 100,000 population. You see that for Greater Manchester overall, a very significant increase over the past 7 days. Bolton is now, we're delighted to say, going down and going down quite rapidly, and that's, I think, going to be relevant to something we'll be saying later because of the measures that Bolton have been taking to bring that rate down. Everywhere else is going up quite significantly, and that rate does vary, but we are now beginning to see quite high prevalence rates across the whole of Greater Manchester. There's only a couple of places now under the 100 cases per 100,000, and one of those more than doubled over the last 7 days as well. Turn to the next slide, and the next slide looks at the over 60s rates, and I repeat, we would look particularly at older people. Older people are far more likely to, if they get COVID, to be hospitalised, far more likely to end up in intensive care. And we are again seeing an increase in the rates for over 60s. It doesn't follow the same pattern as you'll see for the whole population, and that's because relatively small numbers of cases can make a large difference. So the change you see in Manchester, for example, is basically 5 cases per day. So 5 cases per day can make almost a 300% increase in that rate, and you see there is a lot of fluctuation in those rates as well, something that we have been predicting week on week that we will see there, but even so there is an increase in rates there. If you add the two of those things together, the overall rate and the rate in increase in over 60s, does give us, of course, cause for quite serious concern. If we turn to the next slide, and this is really, really stark because it does show absolutely where those cases are falling. And pretty much across the board, it is in the 16 to 29 age group. So this is older secondary school pupils going into higher education and younger working ages. You see some increase in 30 to 44-year-olds, again, still in the working age population. And we also see some increase in the under 15s, the school age population. So that prevalence rate is being very, very much driven by younger people, quite often asymptomatic. Certainly, the level of sickness within that age range is relatively small. The number of people being hospitalised is still relatively small, but of course, there is a direct connection between the rate even for younger people and who does end up in hospital. There is a relationship between vaccination, that most of the cases are in age groups that would not have had access to vaccine, and in some cases are only just now getting access to vaccine, which again is something I'll refer to a little bit later on. But I think it's very, very clear if you look at these heat maps who is contracting the virus, and it is pretty consistent across the whole of Greater Manchester, including Bolton, which is clearly ahead of everywhere else. And we still have reasonable expectations that we're not going to end up with everywhere having the same sort of coloured map as Bolton's got at the moment. But that depends on what we do about it. Turn to the next one. And this is the good news slide amongst all of these, because this is what's happening in care homes. This has now remained constant for a number of weeks, very, very low rates within care homes, no new cases coming through. So although this is weekend in the 7th, that we know that this looks like it's going to continue into future weeks. And I think we do have a lot of confidence that the position in care homes is under control, with very high levels of vaccination and increasing high levels of vaccination amongst care home staff as well as care home residents. If we turn to the next slide, and this is what's happening in our hospitals. And I think this is one we need to treat with a little bit of care. That certainly if we look at the number of admissions and inpatient diagnosis compared to what happened with similar prevalence levels back in waves 2 and 3, it is not as severe as we had at that time. That's undoubtedly the case. Although the number of people in ICU is going up, it's not going up at the rate we saw in the previous waves. And delighted to say that the mortality rate is remaining very, very low, really, really important. But alongside this, there are other impacts. Our entire health system at the moment is under almost unprecedented level of pressure. Not from COVID-19 particularly, but whether it's the ambulance service, whether it's GP practices, whether it's our hospitals, really as pent-up demand that's been suppressed by COVID, not COVID demand, but pent-up demand really appears to be bursting out. And we are certainly getting more calls for appointments to GPs, more attendances at A&E than we were having pre-COVID. Now, at the same time, our hospitals have developed an extensive catch-up programme for all the electives that have been suspended because of COVID. And we're talking about over 300,000 elective backlog cases, so a massive backlog that we need to catch up on. And we have to look at this COVID pressure. Although it's not what we saw back in the autumn or back in February and January, that's adding to existing pressure that exists within the system. We're also seeing absenteeism from school, probably something like 5 times the national rate. So again, there is an impact of those cases amongst younger people self-isolating, where there is an impact on their education that is not being necessarily seen elsewhere. So though, don't see this as purely a northwest of England issue. Andy and I were on a call, as were other leaders, with ministers this morning, looking at the proposals for an enhanced response provision for Greater Manchester and Lancashire. And we're beginning to see that in the west of London and other parts of the southeast and the southwest, also very significant increases in cases there. So it looks like this is a pattern that's being repeated elsewhere, and this does appear to be entirely driven by the Delta variant. I think probably the last thing to add before we move to the final slide is also the concern that whilst we've got that level of prevalence in younger people, whilst it might not be leading to hospitalisation, it does increase the risk of new variants being developed and new indigenous variants being developed, and that may have higher transmissibility and may be more vaccine resistant. And takes me to the last slide here, which is looking at vaccination. We are clearly on 70 pluses. We've now got 91% of the population with their second dose, so with very high levels of protection. we're creeping up on the 50 to 69-year-olds, and there is still a way to go there. The rules have been changed now that we're now looking at an 8-week gap for second dose rather than a 12-week gap. And we urge, and something I've been saying every week, when you get the call for your second dose, go and get your second dose. As far as the evidence goes, that in terms of the Delta variant, the evidence is that basically the second dose doubles the amount of protection that you get from the Delta variant. And that is absolutely true for the AZ vaccine as well. So for people who've had their first dose of AZ vaccine, we have relatively good supplies of the AZ vaccine, so go and get your second dose, because it does have a phenomenal impact on the level of protection you've got. Clearly, we're expecting to go to start vaccinating under 29s in the next week or so, and have already been doing so in targeted areas. And again, for the point made about the impact of transmission on new variants, we would urge all young people, as soon as they've got the opportunity, to go and get their vaccination. Clearly, the news today is about us becoming an enhanced response area, and something that we have had discussions with at official level and at political level with government around, and something that we broadly welcome. This is something that is taking what was already the case in Blackburn and Bolton and applying it to the whole of Greater Manchester and Lancashire. They are measures that we welcome. I'll run through them. The package includes a rapid response team deployed to support local authorities to plan and coordinate coordinate their ground campaign, and the ability to request military aid to the civil authorities, something again that we've had very successfully in Bolton. Supervising school testing, wastewater testing, samples prioritised for sequencing, that specialist comms support to increase awareness, and a particular focus on engagement with disadvantaged groups. This one, really important, although the wording is wonderful: drive vaccine uptake across eligible cohorts by upweighting resources for operational delivery of the vaccine programme. We loosely translate that into surge vaccination, and again, our officials have developed a programme for surge vaccination, a 3-week programme of surge vaccination in target areas, as well as accelerated programmes for vaccination across Greater Manchester. But clearly, for the age groups that we are talking about, it's particularly important that we get adequate supplies of the Pfizer vaccine in order to be able to do that surge vaccination. Directors of Public Health will be able to recommend additional control measures in educational settings, and I think most of them have already asked schools to require pupils and staff to start wearing face masks. Again, basic precautionary measures. We can get enhanced support for compliance and enforcement as well. And probably the last thing I'll mention around this is what's described as enhanced guidance. I have to say that this can be overstated. The enhanced guidance is basically what I think both myself and Andy have been saying every week for a large number of weeks, which is we're not out of the woods yet. The figures say we're clearly not out of the woods. So behave sensibly, take adequate precautions. But it doesn't mean that for people who've planned trips that they have to cancel the trips, or if they've planned family parties, they have to cancel those family parties. Go ahead. It's what I think Leader of Bolton has been saying very clearly for the last few weeks, because they've been under exactly the same guidance, but we are still under the national system as far as controls are concerned, and are still very, very clear is that we don't support local lockdowns or different controls in different parts of the country. This is guidance that says behave sensibly, and again, that's what we want people to do. We want people to behave sensibly. So We are in, as said, certainly a position where there is undoubtedly strain on the system. The measures that have been taken in Bolton have been shown to be relatively successful in reducing prevalence fairly quickly. I think we hope that by taking similar measures across Greater Manchester, first of all, we won't get into the same position that Bolton did, and we are able to bring down prevalence very, very quickly, and reduce the risk to individuals, reduce the risk of new variants, and allow our health system to get on with the recovery. Perhaps the last thing I would say, Andy, although it's not a health thing, is that none of this stops our economy functioning in exactly the way it is functioning now. Really, really important we are able to keep people in work.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. And I'll just add to what you've said before I introduce Bev to speak to everyone on the policing front. But as Richard was saying, we have been in discussions with the government at a political level over the last few days and at official level before that. I want to say today that I'm grateful to the Health Secretary and to other colleagues for the joint approach that has been taken to date. Although we do have one big point on which we would like them to go a little further. Richard touched on it, vaccination, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Overall, what I would like to say at the beginning is it is very important to keep a sense of proportion about what has been announced today. As Richard said, this is guidance. It is advice to the public. It is not a lockdown. It is not a ban. We'd obviously be grateful to you all on this call for reporting it accurately, because by reporting it in a different way, it is then perceived in a different way by the public. It's very important that we are clear about what this is. As Richard said, this is not about telling people to cancel their plans. It is asking them to be careful in setting any new ones, to minimise non-essential travel, and that is, in our view, a sensible approach given the rise in cases that we've seen. So it's about asking people to be cautious, to be more vigilant, given the rise in cases. But at the same time, it's about saying that people can go about living their lives, and we think it's very important that is properly understood by the public. The encouraging news is that obviously Bolton has had similar measures to the ones that are being announced today for the other 9 boroughs in Greater Manchester and for Lancashire. And the signs are that it is working, and credit to all colleagues in Bolton for their efforts, because that gives everybody else here encouragement. I believe that we are seeing a situation where the intervention in the other 9 boroughs is coming earlier than we saw it in Bolton. So we've every reason to believe that the rise that we're seeing can be brought under control quickly, and the situation can be turned around. We've got very good grounds to believe that, because of the way Greater Manchester is working, the efforts that are going in across our communities. We've every reason to believe that what's been announced today will work. That said, we understand the fatigue amongst the public about any changes in advice. We also know that there will be concerns in our businesses. Of course, what we are saying today is, if we are, all of us, a little more cautious, more cognizant of the risks that are out there, the need to maintain distancing and all of the sensible measures that we've been following, we will of course then protect ourselves from things deteriorating, and we will of course, by doing that, protect our economy as well. We have been grateful for the support offered today by the government, but the one point I wanted to come back to was what Richard was saying about vaccination, and just to be absolutely explicitly clear about what we are asking for. Obviously, what we're seeing here is a localized approach to messaging, more localized support on testing and tracing and isolation. We are also saying that also should apply to vaccination. So to be explicit about it, we are not asking for any more vaccine here than our fair share. What we are asking for is the bringing forward of Greater Manchester's supplies so that we can run a surge vaccination programme over the next 3 weeks, particularly in areas that are the higher case areas, so that we can get vaccine take-up over and above 85% in those areas. And we believe we are able to do that with the resources being offered, and we call on the government to work with us on that. And I'm encouraged by what's in the government's announcement today, but also some of the comments that ministers and officials have made. But we think it's really important that the Greater Manchester public understands that while we're being asked to follow this advice, at the same time they can see that all of the tools available to Greater Manchester are being used. Sorry about that. We believe that if we were to surge vaccine supplies into Greater Manchester in the next 3 weeks, and particularly allow us to go further, faster in those areas where we need to drive the take-up, where the case rates are highest, we are very confident that we will have the tools that we need to turn the rising cases around. And that's not just about protecting Greater Manchester, it is of course about protecting the whole country from the wider spread of the Delta variant. So I will leave it there for now. I think just to finish by saying that we strongly support sticking to the national approach when it comes to restrictions and any decisions on restrictions. You know, we accept the need for this localized guidance in the period that we're in at the moment until we turn the case levels around. But as I say, we're confident that we can do that, learning from the Bolton experience. And you know, I can assure everyone on this call that Greater Manchester is doing everything it can to keep our community safe and to play our part in the national effort. So I'm going to leave it there, and I will now just invite Baroness Beverly Hughes to add a policing and compliance update as well. So Bev, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, briefly, we've seen a general increase in levels of activity amongst our citizens over the last week and a half or so since the bank holiday weekend, creating very high demand on the police, a significant increase really of at least 10%, we think, in large gatherings that have taken place. Fighting involved following the Man City fixture led to a number of COVID-related incidents and 2 arrests for racially aggravated offences. The same weekend and also this last weekend as well saw a number of protests, particularly pro-Palestinian protests, both in the city centre and in other parts of Greater Manchester. The protests themselves were largely peaceful and well managed, but we have seen a significant rise in anti-Semitic hate crime over Greater Manchester, as have other parts of the country, following the conflict in Israel and Gaza. And in fact, GMP have stood up a special operation with a goal command structure called Operation Wildflower, in order to both to reassure the Jewish community and to make sure that we're in pole position to take action against people who do commit hate crime, and we will not tolerate that. And I want that message to go out. We'll act decisively against those who commit hate crime of that sort. In relation to COVID-related kind of activity of the police, as I say, over the last 10 days or so, we've seen a significant increase in large gatherings, with drinking, antisocial behaviour, and so on. And the COVID enforcement teams have continued to respond to those events, the joint police local authority teams, and also to instances where we know about breaches in the rules around self-isolation and also quarantining. We've had a woman in Rochdale was fined £1,000 when she breached the self-isolation rules after her parents tested positive. And we've had a number of breaches of people who've absconded from managed quarantine at Manchester Airport and also at the managed centre in Birmingham. They were all apprehended and fined £5,000 each. So all in all, I think, like many of our public services, and Sir Richard identified what's happening in the health service, the police are experiencing very high levels of demand for responses across most areas of activity. The one that illustrates this, I suppose, most visibly, that I wanted to draw to your attention, that we did say something about in the press over the last week, is the 999 calls. Both weekends and continuing during the week, in between the weekends and since, we've seen more than 25% increase in the number of 999 calls. It's not quite clear why. I think it's an indication of the much greater level of activity, of social activity that people are undertaking. People are out and about, the weather's good. The children have been on quite extended school holidays over Greater Manchester. People aren't able to go on holiday. And I'm told that this is the highest level of demand on the police for this service since the World Cup weeks in 2018. So it's very, very high. Just to give you an illustration, over last weekend, from Friday night to Sunday night, we had over 7,000 999 calls alone, leaving aside the 101 and the online chat and all the rest of it. 999 calls, 7,000. And that's also been exacerbated by, over the last 2 weeks or so, a rising number of staff, including in the call handling section, because, of course, they work in a situation which is more conducive to transmission, and the call handlers have been affected. So we've had a very significant spike in the number of people self-isolating. I think it's worth saying that around 50% of those 999 calls at any one time are not for an emergency. And we've had people ringing 999 because of noisy neighbours in the garden next door, ringing 999 to inquire about a family member and to see if they're still in custody or have they been released, and all manner of non-urgent things. So we really want to press people a crime directly, because, of course, as well as that specific demand on emergency response, all the non-COVID crime has been going on. And all of that is in the mix. Of course, with such a high volume of 999 calls, it means that anyone making a call for a real emergency is affected by the extent to which the excess calls for non-emergencies are mitigating against JMP's ability to respond. Situation in the fire service is stable. There are staff self-isolating there as well, but it's not critical. So looking ahead for the MP and the fire service to continue to be high, and that's particularly because of the trends that we're facing now. One is the start of the Euros, and we really don't want people to use the football matches as an excuse for antisocial behaviour and violence and fighting and behaving in a way as well which is going to make COVID transmission more likely. We want people to enjoy those matches, to get behind the England team, and not to use them as an excuse for other problematic behaviour. We think the self-isolation will have to continue for a while, and that will challenge the ability of services to respond to calls for emergency services. Obviously, looking forward to what the change in the weather, together with what people make of the new guidance that we've just heard about, what that will mean in terms of changes in people's behaviour. I think we just have to stress that COVID hasn't gone away, as Sir Richard Dandy has said. It's important to limit transmission as much as possible for all the reasons you've heard about, but also to minimise the risk of new variants emerging, because every time, obviously, the virus infects somebody else, it has a chance to mutate. We're also looking ahead at the possibility in terms of the warmer weather of people congregating in ways that we saw last year, and really want to say right at the outset before that happens, we don't want to see any of those raves and illegal unlicensed music events occurring. They're not only dangerous in terms of the physical harm that we saw came to people who were involved in those, they attract and are often organised by organised criminal gangs, and so there's a high level of criminality behind them, but also they present a considerable risk in terms of COVID transmission, and that we're focused on reducing as much as possible. Thanks, Andy.
Great, thanks so much, Bev. And Ross, I think we're going to be handing over to you now for questions from colleagues in the media.
Thanks very much. So if colleagues in the media could just indicate if they want to ask a question by raising their hand. I see people are already doing that, which is fabulous. Going to go to Michael Gaffney. Michael, you should be able to unmute your mic now. If you just introduce yourself and your organisation, please.
Michael Gaffney, LBC. Thank you. Andy, there's been some reports that elements of the national NHS system have been somewhat resistant to the idea of surge vaccination. I mean, I just want to know how those conversations have been going. And, you know, we've spent the best part of the last year talking about the situation in places like Bolton, other places in the Northwest, the structural issues that mean. Do they get it that it is just a different situation in those places and maybe a different solution's needed?
Well, thanks, Matthew. Michael, thanks very much for your question. It's a self and Sir Richard today. It is a political view, but it's more than that. It's a system view in Greater Manchester. We've made the argument throughout, and we made at the start of the vaccination programme, that really there should have been an acceleration of the programme in parts of the country where health is already poorest. And we've been making that argument consistently, as have our officials all the way through. And obviously it becomes more urgent now in the situation that we are and I think progress is being made, to be fair. And I think the government's press release reflects that. Of course, the government has to balance the needs of all areas, and we understand that. So it's why I'm very explicitly saying today, this isn't about asking for more than we're entitled to, for more than Greater Manchester's fair share. It is about saying we've got an opportunity now with the resources on the ground and the extra support we've got from the military, and to go much faster in the next 3 weeks, which makes sense from our point of view. It builds on the experience that we've had in Bolton, where there has been a degree of acceleration on the vaccination programme. So we're very much wanting to talk to the government now about how we can operationalise a surge vaccination programme over the next 3 weeks, particularly focusing on those younger age groups. We have enough vaccine supplies to do the second vaccinations, and I'm very much on message today, having been for my second jab, and I would obviously encourage all people eligible, all over 50s, to go and do that. What we want to do, though, is focus the surge programme on those younger age groups who may need a little more persuasion if they feel they might have to stand in line, or they're not certain they'll get a vaccination if they turn up. We want to obviously build confidence amongst those age groups that we can meet demand, get them vaccinated, and that's why we want to work with the government on this in our interest, but we believe in everyone's interest in the country. And it's a request is going in from us today in a very, I won't go through all the details with you now, but we are putting in a very clearly worked out request with regard to the supplies that we believe that we would. I don't think it's a case of national resistance, Michael. I think there's been an ongoing conversation, which I hope now can go into a new phase.
And through the wording of the package that is available, and around, particularly around Pfizer, that there are supply constraints about that. It's, as Andy's described, it is whether we get the adequate supply to be able to do what government, I think, are clear that we can do. So I think if we can get that agreement with them, then I don't think there are any principled objections to getting on with it.
Thanks, Richard. I'll move on to the next question. Jen Williams. Jen, you should be able to unmute yourself now. If you just introduce yourself and your organisation, please.
Hello, it's Jen Williams at the MEN. Let me just pull up what I was, so it's a question particularly to Sir Richard Leese, actually, on the travel guidance. And I understand, obviously, what you're saying about this is a question of using common sense, and that it's not law, and that it's very much the same sort of direction that you've been talking for quite some time. Obviously, this is sending a message out to people all over the country that they need to minimise their travel into Greater Manchester. And I'm wondering whether you're worried that that could hit the reopening of the visitor economy this summer, and whether you think there needs to be any kind of additional government compensation to reflect that. And to Andy as well, but it's especially a kind of Manchester visitor economy thing, isn't it? Thanks. Was that all right? Could you hear me?
On the question, it's certainly a concern that we would have, and this relates to what might happen in July, August, September, rather than what's happening now, because we are clear, very much hoping as a city region, and indeed as a country, that a lot of those things will be able to start to return to what we described as something like normal. I think it's probably why we would welcome the approach that's been taken. So I think that gives us the opportunity to be able to get a difficult situation under control very, very quickly, to prevent it getting ludicrously out of hand, to be able to ensure that our businesses are able to continue to operate normally. I think we said previously that we don't support any separate lockdown arrangements for Greater Manchester, and certainly if that was to come on the agenda, we'll be very much looking for support for our businesses. I don't think there is a case at the moment, but it's again something we'll have to keep very much under review, particularly if this situation persists for any length of time.
Just to add briefly, Jen, that obviously I agree with what Richard's just said. I mean, this hopefully will be a short-lived period that we are in. We are encouraged by what we see in Bolton. We are taking this action now, and this is early intervention to be able to protect the economy for the coming summer. So in many ways, what we're doing today is to protect what we want to see over the summer months. And you know, we believe that if we can work with the government on it, you know, we've got every reason to believe that will strengthen our position to have the summer that we all want to see.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to Andy Bounds. Andy, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you feel all right tonight, Andy. My second jab was a bit tough, actually, almost as bad as my first. But just on two questions, I didn't quite, or two statements that didn't quite reconcile themselves to me. One is, I think, Andy, you said, you know, what this package will work as it's worked in Bolton. You then said we also need vaccinations to make it work. So surge vaccinations to make it work. So which is it? You say that, you know, Greater Manchester only wants its fair share, but isn't it a question of timing of vaccinations? Everyone's getting these vaccinations in a rolled out programme at the same time. If Greater Manchester grabs its supply earlier, that has to be diverted from somewhere else, even though everyone will all get the same in the end. And if I'm sitting in another council area and I suddenly get a spike in the Indian variant and all my, some of my vaccines have been diverted somewhere else, I might not be too happy about that. So what's your understanding of the flow and supply situation? Are there vast stockpiles which Manchester could be given, or would it have to come from somewhere else in the short term? Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. And you've not cheered me up very much about what might be in store for me in the rest of the day, but I'm feeling fine, actually. And that would be the message to everybody. It's dead easy to get your vaccination. Been into the mass vaccination centre at the Etihad today. Brilliant operation they've got there now, and well, they've had it all the way through. And yeah, please go forward, everybody. If you're due your second jab, go and get it, and that will really help us all. As Richard said, the second jab makes a massive difference when it comes to the Delta variant. And just on that point, before I get into your question, Andy, you know, the argument's been made throughout this about, you know, looking at pressure on hospitals and taking measures to relieve pressure on hospitals. We are making a slightly different argument, I think, with the government now, which is if we allow transmission in the community unchecked, it increases the risk of a mutation and a new variant, and that then puts at risk the vaccination programme. So it is a change in argument than the one that people have got used to over the preceding months of the pandemic. But I think it is a correct argument, and that's why the need for this precautionary approach. So, you know, can't stress enough, second jabs and people going forward for their first jabs, we absolutely want to see all of our residents doing that. On your precise question, though, no, I don't think it is contradictory, Andy, in that Bolton were given extra flexibility around vaccination and the ability to move more quickly. I think they were given some extra supplies in some instances, modest numbers, but they were. And what we're saying is, you know, we want to see that same approach applied more broadly to the rest of Greater Manchester. And that is a different ask, of course, given this is 9 extra boroughs rather than just 1. But given that it works, we're saying, you know, come on, help us to do that. But having said that, we're not talking of, you know, kind of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of extra vaccines. The team have worked up the precise number, and it's you know, a manageable number. And actually, this is about all higher case areas in other parts of the country. It just makes sense, doesn't it, to, you know, give those areas the tools they need when they are in the position where they've got higher cases. And if that means that, you know, we are slightly delaying the progress in another area where there are low cases, it just makes sense for everybody, including for those areas who are at risk if the variant spreads in areas where it's already highest. So we just think this is in the interest of everybody everywhere. You know, if we're going to have a more localized, targeted approach to testing and to messaging, it follows that the same should be applied to vaccination as well, however, working within those JCVI eligible cohorts. So, you know, we believe this is a, you know, considered, proportionate request, and we believe it can be met without putting any other areas unfairly behind the queue or at risk in any way. So it's been carefully thought through, Andy, and we are encouraged by some of what the government is saying in response.
Thanks, Andy. Unless Richard wants to come in, we'll move on to the next question.
I think it's probably worth saying just a little bit more, but I'm going to repeat 2 bits from the agreement or the package which is there, and you can decide what you think it means in some respects. But 1, drive vaccine uptake across eligible cohorts by upweighting resources for operational delivery of the vaccine programme. That sounds to me like making more vaccine available for target areas. Second bit is, subject to agreement, designate a vaccines champion to ensure all available resources from the vaccine programmes are harnessed to support access and uptake in a local area, linking this surge activity to the community engagement on testing. It's already in the language that government are using, and it's the really big point, and Andy's made it, is that if we don't contain it here, it will spread to other places. So let's contain it here, which is good for us and it's good for those other places as well.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to move on to Inzi Rashid. Inzi, you should be able to unmute your mic now.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, Andy. The Northwest has faced vaccine hesitancy issues with parts of local population, including Greater Manchester. Has the inability to convince these people left the area falling behind and potentially stopping the whole country becoming free of restrictions on the 21st of June?
I think there's been a challenge in all parts of the country where we've had to combat hesitancy in all communities, Inzi. So, you know, this is an issue that we've had from the start of the vaccination programme. We've been working very hard at it. Actually, the slide that Sir Richard presented before is really encouraging for us. You know, we're way above 85% now in the oldest cohorts, certainly in the very oldest, and you know that's brilliant to see. And what we want now is to get that figure amongst those younger groups up to that level, and that's what the Surge programme would be all about. And we have worked with colleagues in the Jewish community where there was some issues around hesitancy, and in the Muslim community, in all communities actually. We've been innovative in the places in which we're delivering the vaccine. So no, we've got good evidence now across our boroughs. You know, our districts have become really expert really in knowing what works and what doesn't, and constantly trying new things. I think what they have reported, and this was said at our committee this morning, is that with younger people, it is important to be able to give a message out about people. If they turn up, they will get it. And obviously, if there's doubts about supplies or kind of a sense that there's a really long wait, or that can affect take up. And what we want to do is give our local district teams the supplies that they need to sort of really get out into the communities where we most need to build take up now, and have a really concerted effort that will get those numbers up. And we are confident we can do it in all communities, actually. So no, this isn't about blaming any community. It's about moving at speed now to get this job done. You know, we're nearly there in Greater Manchester with the vaccination programme. A brilliant job has been done, and it's this kind of moment we've got now to push on really hard in the next few weeks. Everybody's geared up and ready to do it. You know, we're grateful for the government support. There's just a moment here now to really press on in the next 3 weeks ahead of the summer proper. And we're just saying let's take full advantage of this window, and we're confident our communities will come with us.
Thanks. I'll move on to the next question unless either of the speakers want to come in.
I might be a bit harsher than you, Andy, actually. I think we need to get over to people, and we are struggling to get over to people, that anybody who's could have a vaccine that doesn't get a vaccine is putting themselves at risk, is potentially putting other people at risk, and is potentially undermining the NHS. Andy's absolutely right. This is not about blame, but it is about, we do need to get that message over. Vaccination is not a nice to have. It's not the sole solution, but it is absolutely crucial that we get as many people vaccinated as possible.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to go to Shahab Khan. You should be able to unmute your mic now and ask your question. If you just introduce yourself and your organisation, please.
Shahab Khan here from ITV News. Andy, can I ask you about the timing of this extra support? Has it come timely enough? Is it too late? Would you have liked to have had it a little bit earlier? We saw what was going on in Bolton. Would you prefer to have had this a week before? And in terms of those vaccinations, have you been told how many extra doses you're actually going to get? And if you're going to be requesting more, is there a figure that you've got in mind? Is there a specific number that you actually want or need to make sure you can address the issue?
Thanks very much, Dominic. Sound was a little shaky there, but I think I got most of it. Ross, if you could just make sure I did get it all. The second question was on the numbers of supplies. The first question was on.
It was on the timing of the extra support.
Sure. Yeah.
We'd liked it a few weeks earlier.
I think, in truth, Dominique, I think it probably would have been helpful for it to have come a little earlier. There's been discussions ongoing for some time, but we recognise that there's calls from lots of areas, and I'm trying to be fair to the government. We're not seeking to cause an argument here. I think in terms of the vaccine supplies, I say if you break it down per district, we're talking probably single, thousands or small double figure thousands in terms of the supplies that are needed. So we believe it's a manageable number. The exact number is going into the government in terms of what we think we need to run a highly targeted, successful surge program over the next 3 weeks. So I don't want to give you the exact figure today because I think it's just being finalised, if I'm honest. But we do believe it's a manageable number that doesn't kind of throw the vaccination program upside down. To kind of follow on from what Andy Bounds was saying a moment ago, this is manageable within the overall situation that we are in. And just touching on the last question again, picking up what Richard was saying, I think one thing I would really ask everybody to avoid today is the blame game. Blaming particular communities, or some people say, "Oh, Greater Manchester in the news again," or Lancashire in the news again, or Sir Richard was saying there is increase in this variant in other parts of the country, in parts of the south as well. I mean, people could look at the issues about the red list in India, and that it's not going to get us anywhere. Is my point in going down that path. I think we have got solutions now that we didn't have last year. We've got tools that we can use, and our message today to the government is a positive one. Give us those tools. Give us those tools. We will go and do the job. We will keep people safe. We will keep Greater Manchester safe, and by extension, the rest of the country. And that's very much the position that we are in today. It's a positive message, and I would encourage everybody to avoid the blame game here. We've made a lot of progress, and with that bit of extra help, we think we can really bring the vaccination programme home in the next few weeks.
Thanks. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to move on if that's okay. I'm going to go to Claire Fallon. Claire, if you could just say who you are and where you're from. You should be able to unmute yourself just up the top there. Can't hear you yet, Claire. Claire, if I go to Rob, would that be all right? I'm just.
There we go. You with me?
Sorry, we've only been a year in this pandemic, Claire.
We
thought you could have worked the mute button by now.
But it's on Teams and I'm used to Zoom and, it's confusing.
That's not an excuse. I'm sorry.
And also I'm crap. You know that.
We'll speak to Channel 4. We'll rearrange a training programme for you.
Thanks. That'd be good. What I wanted to ask was, broadly, I mean, bear in mind, with the local lockdowns last year, partly the restrictions were law and partly the restrictions were guidance. I appreciate this time what we're being asked to do is guidance and we're being asked to do it. But in reality, how is this not a local lockdown in anything but name? And to Sir Richard, I spotted you on a boat about a week and a half ago, and I wondered whether you had been pinged by contact tracers and whether you, like me, are in self-isolation at the moment as a result of a plane load of football fans, and whether now, bearing in mind what people are being asked to do in terms of not travelling unnecessarily, whether now you slightly regret having travelled out for the Champions League final.
Shall I go first? Thanks, Claire. Sorry, I wasn't being facetious there with your mute issues. So, no, it isn't a lockdown. Let's be really clear about what this is. This is guidance of the kind that we had at different times last year in advance of Tier 3 or Tier 2 or any of that. We had extra guidance in place in Oldham for a good part of last summer, and in other areas as well. Let's trust in the good judgment here of the British public. They are being asked to be cautious. They are being asked to minimise. They are being asked to be more vigilant. Remember the measures. If you can meet outside, don't meet indoors. I mean, that isn't a lockdown. If someone's going to go and visit friends this weekend, it's saying meet them in the garden, don't meet them indoors. That's what the advice is saying if you read it. I think that is a reasonable request to put to people. given the situation that we are in. It's about saying, look, minimise things. If you've not set new plans yet, well, don't make any more. Perhaps stick to the ones you've got and keep those to a minimum. So I don't. I think it's unhelpful for it to be sort of ratcheted up into something that it's not. And that's why I said at the beginning, let's not call this a ban or a lockdown, because that is to blur two things. This is something different. It is sensible advice, sensible requests that we're asking the public to follow. And I'll let Sir Richard answer the second point. But of course, it's new advice. We weren't in this position a couple of weeks ago, and life is changing all of the while. And that's been the story of this pandemic. And we can only react to what is happening before us. I don't think we could have looked at the figures this week and then said to the government, you know what, we're not going with this. We're not having it. It wouldn't have been responsible. The situation has changed. You saw that in our figures that we presented to you, and we're doing what we believe to be the right thing to do. But obviously, I'll hand over to Richard for the second part of that.
Yeah, I'd say that even on the first part, and this evening I will be going for a work-related meal in a restaurant that I know is absolutely COVID compliant in the way it's run. So it is being careful, and I see absolutely no reason why that or things like that should be cancelled. I think in terms of returning from Porto, that there were one or two planes on which there were people who tested positive on that, and it is those people that have been asked to self-isolate, as I understand it. And I can say I have got the NHS app on, and I have not been asked to self-isolate, because I don't think there were any cases on the plane that I returned on. In terms of whether I regret going to Porto or not, you've tempted me to get into Pep's team selection at the moment, and I don't think I'm going to do that on this press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to go to Maya. Maya, you should be able to unmute your microphone now if you just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Hi, Maya Wolf-Robinson from The Guardian. Given that case numbers are getting younger and younger, and especially in Bolton and Blackburn, we've seen them for school-age children. Andy, do you support vaccinating children under 18? Obviously, last week Pfizer was approved for 12 to 18-year-olds.
Personally, I do, certainly starting with 16 to 18-year-olds, Maya, and that also is a case that we have made to JCVI, given that Pfizer has been licensed for a while for 16 to 18s, as I understand it. And I think there is a case for going younger still. I think Sir Richard made it earlier. So, let's follow the evidence, follow the way in which the virus is now progressing. It is clearly more prevalent in those younger age ranges. There is international experience to draw on here with some of the developments in the United States. Of course, proceed with caution when it applies to younger people and children. But I would certainly say over 16s, Maya, if I could kind of just summarise it at that for now. I think there's an absolutely robust case to extend the programme to over 16s. That, I'm sure the government would say, is a matter for JCVI first and foremost. But I do believe they should give it serious consideration.
Thanks, Andy. Again, conscious of time, so I'm going to move to Hannah. Hannah, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Is it the curse of ITN again and the mute button?
Hannah, you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you, I'm afraid. Hannah, I think we'll come back to you if that's all right. I'm going to go to Tom Dambach. Hannah, I'll leave your mic open if you want to try and see if you can unmute yourself. Tom, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, Andy. Just obviously debates around June 21st still. and what that might look like. And I just wondered, with what the data looks like in Greater Manchester at the moment, what impact you think, if that were to go ahead, what impact that could have as we try and bring things under control, particularly with that programme of 3 weeks and surge vaccinations you were talking about?
Thanks, Tom. So that is, of course, a national decision, and we would say rightly so. And we don't want any return, as Sir Richard was saying earlier, to local lockdown. I mean, we just can't make this clearer, Tom. You know, we would much prefer moving nationally. It's served us well so far, and we are not against, obviously, any kind of sensible changes to the dates in the roadmap if they are what the government judged to be necessary. But it is a national decision, and it can't just be based on us alone. You know, it has to be a decision taken with all other areas in mind. All I can say is that we believe, you know, if we get a favourable response to what we're saying today, you know, that gives confidence, I would say, to the roadmap, and it's actually an argument for surge vaccination, to be honest with you, Tom. You know, if you move more quickly in the highest case areas, I think it builds confidence around sticking to the dates in the roadmap, or only you know, creating minor adjustments to those dates. I think not to do it, you know, probably puts it more at risk. I would argue that's the logic of what we're putting to you today. So it's a national decision. We are glad that it remains a national approach. You know, of course, we will work with the government on it, but we believe it does make, you know, the case for what we're saying today.
Thanks. Did any of the other panelists want to come in on that point? No. Hannah, are you able to unmute on your thing yet? Just shake your head or nod. No.
Hannah, do you want to put it in the chat?
I've got the question here. I think it was quite similar to Tom's, but I'll just read it out. You're talking about a 3-week intervention, presumably therefore guidelines are expected to last 3 weeks. Does that take us beyond June the 21st? And does June the 21st now seem totally unrealistic? And we'll start this take.
I don't know whether Richard wants to come in on this one as well. No, not necessarily, Hannah. You know, so this is advice running alongside people living their lives, as Richard was saying before, and it is really important to keep that distinction. It's about, you know, doing what you're doing, and you know, not going into lockdown, but just being cautious when you're doing what you're doing, and being vigilant and minimising things that are unnecessary, and meeting outside wherever you can. So there's a difference between that and measures when people are being told what to do, which is the roadmap. You know, so you could conceivably see a situation where they would proceed to the next stage of the roadmap, and this kind of guidance might stay in place alongside it. So these are matters for the government. You know, we are happy to go with what they are saying at the moment, given the change in cases in Greater Manchester. But we also are encouraged by Bolton, and we think we can give further confidence to the roadmap process by the targeted action across test, tracing, isolation, but also that vaccination side of things as well.
I think what I would add is that it's looking at the detail of Bolton, where cases are now going down, and actually going down quite rapidly. If you look at the very first table that we showed today, and I think if we're in a position where we can manage the increase in cases, turn it around in a way that doesn't put that phenomenal pressure, excess pressure on the NHS. If we can do that, then we're on course. If we don't do that, then, as government's always said, they will have to judge it on the data at the time. But that's their job to do that. And clearly, what also said is they're going to have to look at data elsewhere in the country as well as that. You're not in a position to do that. So I think clearly that there will be a decision for government to make. What we're absolutely clear about is it needs to be a national decision, not a range of localised decisions.
Thanks. We've got two final questions. I'm going to go to Emma Gill first. Emma, you should be able to unmute your mic now, and then we'll finish with Rob Winshuffle.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi Emma.
Skill testing, have you been told what that's now going to look like? Who's going to be doing this testing? And how worried are you about how many days school pupils have already lost in this region? Surely this testing is inevitably going to lead to losing more school days, because it's going to pick up on all those asymptomatic cases that would otherwise go not in a good way, that go through. They're going to be bracing themselves, are they, for further disruption now?
Richard may want to come in on the testing side of things. Just to say on school absences, the latest data that I've been given backs up what you're saying, that there is a higher level of school absence here. I think running around 5%, I think, on the last figures, compared to 1% nationally. So there is an issue there. And of course, it comes on the back of a year when students in Greater Manchester have been much more disrupted than people in other parts of the country. And we have worries about the impact on young people. We are deeply disappointed with the response to Sir Kevin Collins' work on recovery, both academic recovery, but children and young people's social and emotional recovery. We don't believe the package announced last week goes in any way enough to deal with the loss of learning, the loss of developmental time in schools, and that's an issue that we very much want to return to. So it is a concern, but we are actually the ones who've made the argument to the government that there needed to be a more flexible approach in schools. The Department for Education and the Education Secretary were trying to take a sort of blanket approach, no face coverings at all, and that was the position, and no one could deviate from it. Well, that wasn't sensible in our view. We made a request for more flexibility, and that has correctly been granted in our view. So that's the position. Of course, it could lead to further disruption, but that just makes the case even stronger for that recovery funding over the summer. So, I think I take on board some of the concerns that you're raising. I would just add, of course, there's the issue of the Pupil Premium, which is still unresolved, or, well, resolved in the wrong way, maybe I put it that way, where kids who went on to preschool meals in the back end of last year, post-October, they will not be attracting the top-up funding because of a change to the way the government is calculating the Pupil Premium. And again, that is disadvantaging those who have been most impacted by the pandemic because of their family circumstances, and we don't believe that can be justified either. And it's an issue that shouldn't be allowed to slip under the radar. I think it has kind of slipped a bit under the radar. It shouldn't. We lose about £10 million our schools in Greater Manchester as a result of that change. And all of this, when you combine all of these things, the extra measures, the extra testing, the loss of funding, our students have been impacted upon more than those in other parts of the country, and we will continue to speak up for them.
Just briefly, I think it was Sir Richard who mentioned about seeking further enforcement or compliance. Was that with masks or with the testing? Because obviously it is voluntary, and a lot of parents haven't necessarily agreed for their children to be tested. Is that what you were referring to?
No, that wasn't a reference to schools. That's a reference to enforcement around premises, actually, rather than schools.
Right.
Thanks, Richard. I'm just going to have to, conscious of time, I'm just going to have to go on to the final question. Apologies. Rob, if you could just unmute your mic and who you are and where you're from.
Hi, it's Rob Winshuffle, Channel 4 News. You've spoken in this press conference about people making sensible decisions based on the new guidance for Greater Manchester. What would you say to someone in 13 days' time when it's a possibility that they can walk into a nightclub with hundreds of other people indoors to meet? Is that sensible? And what would you say to the government on Monday when they're making their decision over whether there should be a complete unlock on the 21st? Should that complete unlock be pushed back?
Well, as I was saying, Rob, before, it is a national decision, and people are able to walk into. You talk about a nightclub as though it's massively different to a pub or a different indoor environment. People have to make sensible decisions about the situation that we are in and whether it's right to carry on with some of those activities. It's different to say that we are closing them and we're saying no one can. And that's not what's happening. And we think that is the right distinction to make at this moment in time. It's about learning from last year. It's about being proportionate. It is about asking people to err on the side of caution. And so, the example I gave to you about, people visiting friends in a garden or at home, clearly, set up the telly for Euro 2016 in the garden. Don't get everyone in the front room, and hopefully the weather will be okay to do that this weekend. That's the kind of thing. And I think that takes people with what's being done in a way that some of what happened last year didn't take people with what's being done. When we heard last week that the government wanted to kind of move in this direction with regard to this guidance, we said to them, look, let's work together on it and position it in a way where we all feel we know what's being said and what's being asked of people, and we do it jointly. And I think that reflects, good learning from where we were last year. And I think this far into the pandemic, given we've more tools at our disposal, there was, less hospitalisation, less risk to older people. I think we can, speak more to people's judgment rather than simply, intervening and telling them they can't do something. So that's the answer I would give to you. This is guidance that could overlay any decisions on the roadmap, given that there will be areas at any given time that may see a rise in cases. It's about keeping things in proportion, not letting everything being blown off course, but obviously taking early action to deal with an emerging situation. And that's what is happening here today. That's what you've heard about from Sir Richard, from Bev, from myself today.
Thanks. I think that's all the questions, and we're a bit over time. So, Andy, if you're happy to finish, we can finish now.
Great stuff. Thanks to you, Ross. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Colin's got through a lot there, but we really appreciate you being with us. So thank you very much. See you next time. Bye.